Hi, welcome back. Now in this particular session, we'll discuss about events. Now there are two kinds of events in an Excel file. One is a workbook event and the other one is a worksheet event. But before jumping on to workbook and worksheet events, we'll just discuss what events are. So any action you do in an Excel file is considered as an event. So it may be like opening a workbook or going to a specific worksheet, editing a particular worksheet, entering data, saving or closing a file. All of these are considered as events. We can use these events or actions by adding VBA codes to make Excel perform in a certain way. These VBA codes are then known as event handlers. So, for example, uh, let's say I want a greeting message of good day whenever I open an Excel file, or let's say I want to automatically capture the date and time and the name of a person whosoever opens a file to some other location so that I can make an audit trail of who all are opening a particular file or have access to a particular file. So I can do all of these things using events. Now, if you may recall in the first session where we were discussing the Visual Basic Editor, I had mentioned that normally the codes need to be written in modules, and just that whenever the codes are related to a specific sheet or the entire workbook, then they need to be written in either the sheet code module or the this workbook module. Similarly, when we are writing codes which are based on events, say event for a particular worksheet, that will go into that particular sheet code module. Similarly, if I want to use event for the entire workbook, then I will write that VBA program in the this workbook module. Now to look at the different types of workbook events we have, so we'll go to an Excel file. We'll go to the developer tab, Visual Basic, this workbook module, and I've got workbook over here. This particular drop down will give me a list of events which I can club together with my workbook. So for example, workbook activate. Over here, I've written a code of workbook open. So we'll discuss this later in the session. Similarly, workbook for sheet activate or workbook event combined with before deleting a particular sheet or before double clicking. So you've got this list of different events which you can add a VBA program to and then make it useful for yourself. Let's go back to the deck before discussing this. Now, some of the most used workbook actions that trigger the event. So, open. So, basically, whenever you open the workbook, activate. Whenever the workbook is activated, so you've got four different workbooks, and you move to a particular specific workbook which has this event in it, or which has a VBA program to handle this event. Then this will get executed. Before close, that is when you are about to close the Excel file. Before save, when you are about to save an Excel file. New sheet, whenever a new sheet is created in the workbook. Sheet activate, whenever any sheet in the workbook is activated. Then sheet change, any worksheet in the workbook if it is edited or changed by a user. Then you've got window activate, any window of the workbook is activated. So you've got these different types of workbook actions, and you've got events corresponding to them. So now you can add some VBA programs to it and then use these events to achieve some objective. Now over here, I look at some of the event examples. So workbook open is one of the most widely used event. So for example, if I want a greeting message as soon as I open my Excel file, I can use a workbook event. So for example, if you look at this particular code, private sub workbook open. So I'm using the workbook open event over here. So let's see how this works. Just do an escape. I'll just copy this part and I'll just comment the existing code which I have. Now before pasting, I'll do workbook open. I'll now paste this. So now what I'll do, I'll save this. My file is module10 events.xlsm. So I'll close this. I'll close my Excel file. Now I'll go to my file explorer. I'll open this file. So now as you can see, I've got the message hello with today's date and current time. So this is how you can use these events for your own benefit. Now let's just remove this and let's uncomment this. This particular code, which I'll just walk you through, is used quite often in the industries where people want to keep a check or tab on who is opening a particular file. So over here, what we are using is we are using the workbook open event. So whenever someone opens this particular Excel file, so that particular username is passed and that is through the system. So if I'm opening this file, VBA will take the username, my username automatically from the system. It will take the current date and time. It will open another workbook which is kept at a particular path, and this workbook is module10 VBA.xlsm. For adding more complexity, if this workbook is password protected, I can also pass the password through this particular statement. Then in this particular workbook itself, which Excel opens, I will activate this workbook, or basically VBA will activate this workbook, and it will look at the last entry in column A, so that when it now pastes, it pastes in the row after the last entry. So basically in a new row which does not consist of any information. So that value has been given as I. Now in this particular workbook VBA.xlsm, it goes to sheet audit. To the value I, it just adds 1. So basically moves my cursor or my cell to the new row. It gives the username, and to the corresponding column in the new row, it gives the current date and time. Then it saves that particular file and closes that file. So if someone does not know that there's a macro behind opening this particular workbook and tries to access this to take some data out, I can easily go back to that particular file module 10 vba.xlsm to check who has opened this particular file. So this sort of technique or audit trail is usually used in industries where you've got one Excel file and there are multiple users who are opening that file, or you've got access to that file. So let's see how this works. So I've got this macro now. I'll save this. I'll close this. I'll close this Excel file also. So now I'll click this. Now on the face of it, I do not know anything. I've got this file open. I have no idea that another file also opened. But let's just go to module 10 VBA. As you can see, the entry has now popped up that someone opened this file at 8:43 on 14th of June. Let me just comment it out. You can also use conditional constraints like if then else statement also. So now I'll just walk you through this program. So right now we are using the if condition over here. So whenever this workbook will open, VBA will check this particular if condition. If today's date, we are considering over here Sunday as the first day of the week. Let's keep it to 4. Then message hello and now. Let's see if this works. I'll close this and now I'll open this. So as you can see, I've got this prompt now. Again, let's go back to developer, Visual Basic. Let's just delete this. Similarly, you can write programs to say select a specific cell whenever the Excel file gets opened, or take the user to a particular sheet. So using Workbook Open, you can do quite a lot of different things. Now let's go back to our deck. So now let's look at Workbook New Sheet and Before Save event examples. So for New Sheet event, this particular procedure will execute whenever a new sheet is added to the workbook, and the sheet is passed to the procedure as an argument or a parameter. Now, because a new sheet can be either a worksheet or a chart sheet, this procedure determines the sheet type. So if it's a worksheet, it inserts a date and timestamp in cell A1. So over here, it is passing the sheet and it's checking the sheet over here using if condition and type name sh. If this is worksheet, then range A1 or cell A1, we'll have sheet added and now date. So let's see if I run this. Now let's get back to our Excel file and let's add a new sheet. So immediately you added a new sheet. It's now given you a prompt sheet added 14th June 2017 at 8:50 p.m. Before save event, this event triggers just before the workbook is saved. So as soon as you press Ctrl plus S or click on save button, the event will trigger. Now over here we've got an example where we are looking at if the file is being saved for the first time or not. Because if the file is being saved for the first time, then it will throw the prompt of save as. Otherwise it will do not throw any prompt, it will just save the file. The prompt of save as will also be thrown if the file is in read mode only. So what we are doing over here is if this save as appears, then we will get a message box that save the file in .xlsm, that is macro enabled format for enabling macros. So I'm not running this particular example. I'll be sharing this deck so you can run this at your end and just see how it works out. I've got another example for before save event. So I've got this code. Now I'll be providing this code with the deck so you can add more stuff to it and you can just play around with it. So before we run this, let me just add some dummy values to my data. So I'll go to Excel file sheet 1. So what my code is designed to do over here is that my column A and column B are equally populated or not. By equally populated, I mean that all the rows are populated or not for both column A and column B. So for example, in our case, I've filled 4 rows of information for column A. For column B, I've just filled 3 rows of information. So this code will then give me an error before I save. So let's just see how this works. So I'm not running this. All I need to do is I need to click on save. So it gives me an error that workbook will not be saved unless column B is not filled. Please make sure all columns are filled with respect to the names. So what this code is doing is it is first of all defining a variable I, and this variable I is taking the value of how many rows have been populated in column A. This is one of the ways by which we can calculate how many rows are populated, and using count a function also we can determine the same thing. So in our case this value comes out to 5 because column A has been populated till the 5th row. So J will execute from 2 to 5 and Z will take the value of number of rows populated in column 2 and Y will take the number of rows populated in column A or column 1. If Z is not equal to Y, then I get this message box. If Z is equal to Y, then I will not get any message box. So let's see. Now if I click on save, it gets saved. So this is again one of the ways by which you can use before save event. So you can make sure that your data is properly filled or not. Now let's go back to our deck. Now, worksheet events. These events are for individual worksheets and hence are stored in the code module of the worksheet for which we plan to use them. Activate when a particular worksheet is activated for which this code has been written. Before double click when the worksheet is double clicked. Before right click when the worksheet is right clicked. Calculate when the worksheet is calculated or recalculated. Selection change, the selection on the worksheet is changed, and etc. To look at the different types of worksheet events, go to the VB editor. Let's go to sheet 2. So I've got my worksheet over here, and over here I've got these different events which I can use. Let's go back to my deck. So over here I look at a couple of examples. One is worksheet change. So whenever there is any change which happens to the worksheet, this event will trigger. And the other one is whenever a particular worksheet is activated, so this event will trigger. So now worksheet change event, as I mentioned over here, it will trigger whenever a specified range or cell in a worksheet is changed by the user and not by the formula. So let's see how this works. Let's just copy and paste this. So now I've got this particular code in sheet 2 code module. So let's go to sheet 2, and as per the code, if we change anything in B to G, then it will trigger. So let's say, so as you can see, I've got the current date and time. If I do any changes over here, then again, but if I do any changes in column H, then it will not trigger. Now let's go back to the code. So over here, target is the argument or parameter, and it has been defined as a range object and refers to the cells which will be changed, or in our case which we had changed. So in our case we had changed B4 or we had changed F6. So now that we made the changes to cell B4 over here, target variable will now hold the value of B4. And then using this particular intersect function, VBA is then checking if there is an intersect, that is common cell between the target and the range. So our range is BG whereas our target is B4. So definitely there is an intersect. And then using not and nothing, it's just basically like two negatives when multiplied together make a positive. So if there is an intersect, then in the target row, so over here our target was B4. So for B4 cell, the row is 4. So fourth row, cell 1, we'll have now, which will give me the current date and time. Worksheet activate. So this event will execute whenever we go back to a specific sheet. If you look at this example below, it just throws a message box that do not delete the formula. Now, knowledge of events and form controls is something what is used in user forms. When we'll be doing user forms, there would be a couple of more event handler codes which we'll use over there. If you've got any questions, then do let me know. And yes, I'll be giving some exercises around worksheet events. So yeah, please do go through them. Thank you.